Okay, let's move on to heart failure. We looked at some of the pathophysiology of this last week on our brief Zoom call. An important thing to remember with heart failure is that the heart acts as a pump, and it's a special pump because it responds to how filled it is. And essentially, if the heart can't eject the blood that's in it, two things happen. One is a lot of that blood stays stuck in the heart, and the heart will actually allow itself to balloon out, which, strangely enough, helps it to contract more forcefully. There's a mechanism in place called a Starling mechanism that when the heart allows itself to dilatate, it can contract a little more vigorously. The other thing that happens is other parts of the body start to feel it. If there's not good blood circulation, if the heart's not pumping, then there's no blood flow. The brain doesn't like it. The muscles don't like it. The kidneys in particular don't like it. And what happens is the kidneys secrete this hormone called renin. And renin gets the body to retain sodium. It also gets the blood vessels to tighten up. And what happens is the kidneys find themselves more pressurized, and they like it. So what was happening before the renin secretion is the pressure of blood going into the kidneys is dropping, and the kidneys are just not set up to work when they're not pressurized. As a filter, they just fail. And when renin's secreted, you're retaining sodium, which means you hold all this water in your body, and your blood pressure goes up, and your vessels get tighter, and suddenly the kidneys find they've got plenty of pressure in them, and they work, and they filter the blood, and you get healthy again. Now, the only problem with this, it does create high blood pressure, and it can start to cause other problems. It can start to swamp the lungs with fluids and cause major breathing issues. So these are what we call compensations. And compensations can keep you alive, but compensations are no substitute for a properly functioning organ. So some of the things to consider here with managing congestive heart failure. We don't have to get into all the clinical management, but just to think about some of the nutritional aspects, sodium restriction is something that any physician, including allopathic physicians, will recommend. So although we think of the increase in blood pressure as a good thing because it keeps the kidneys from shutting down, it keeps the person from dying, they don't really need the levels of sodium that are in a lot of typical foods, especially processed foods. So when we say sodium restriction, we're not talking about an insanely low amount of dietary sodium, but really steering clear from restaurant food, not putting a salt shaker on the table, not using a lot of things like soy sauce or salted popcorn or things that just really amp up the sodium. What will happen when someone eats these and they have heart failure, they'll find that their feet and ankles swell up. So now they're just like super retaining water. And, high blood pressure causes its own problems. Now, another thing to consider is coenzyme Q10, which we just mentioned when we discussed angina. And, we're talking about a heart that is diseased. And with congestive heart failure, whether you got there from heart attacks or a virus that destroyed the heart or a toxic, a drug that was toxic to the heart, whatever that is, usually diseased or unhealthy heart tissue happens to also be low in CoQ10, which is a problem because we need coenzyme Q10 for oxidative phosphorylation, which is how we generate energy in the mitochondria. So this heart that is a muscle that is now a failing pump, it's lacking even the, basic enzyme for one of many, of course, but one of the basic enzymes for creating ATP at the end of the day. So the doses used in some of these studies is more than maintenance. I've seen studies that used up to 500 milligrams per day. And CoQ10 is a little expensive, but it's generally pretty safe. There's some theoretical concerns that it could cause blood thinning. And so, again, one to watch out for people taking really strong blood thinners. But, it seems to make the heart function better. It seems to not cause side effects. And people can, do better. They can walk further. They have less symptoms. They have better quality of life. Since we're in the mitochondria, also, L-carnitine, which is important for the beta oxidation of fatty acids. So pulling fatty acids into the mitochondria, and which is L-carnitine. The L-carnitine shuttle pulls fatty acids into the mitochondria where they can get burned up for fuel. And that is important. The heart is a muscle. It does work aerobically, but beta oxidation is one way that cells that need a lot of energy can supply themselves with energy. Magnesium, which we talked about with angina, is important as well. It seems that magnesium seems to stabilize some of the electrophysiological functioning of the heart. And in people with heart failure, they can start to have arrhythmias. So not only the heart rate becoming irregular, but the electrical wave that goes through heart muscle and causes it to contract in a synchronized, efficient way, that can become confused. And magnesium is one thing that's needed to stabilize it. And again, people can be deficient in magnesium because their diet is not adequate. Also, some of the drugs that people take for heart failure every day, such as digoxin, a very strong drug made from a plant, diuretics, which cause you to pee out the magnesium, and something called an ACE inhibitor, which is angiotensin converting enzyme. The hormone renin, which we looked at, later becomes something called ACE in the body, and that could be somewhat blocked with these drugs. Taurine is another thing. Taurine is an important structural component of the heart. It's an amino acid, and it's also important for the regulation of calcium in the heart muscle cells. Calcium can come into heart muscle cells through special channels, and it seems like taurine helps regulate that. So there's not too little, not too much, because we don't want the electrical activity in the heart to short circuit, which can happen in a diseased heart. So taurine is, it's not a treatment for someone with very advanced cardiac arrhythmias, but it does seem to be a good preventive for people who happen to have congestive heart failure and don't, want good electrical function and good muscle function of their heart. So we've looked at some of these things before. Here's some allopathic drugs. Furosemide is a drug that makes you urinate out incredible amounts of sodium, and then water follows. And it's very good for people with lungs that are getting waterlogged. I don't know if we mentioned omega-3s here, but we'd said with angina, alpha-linolenic acid from plants like flaxseed oil is an omega-3, but 10 or 15% or something like that of it gets converted up to EPA, DHA, and it is perhaps more effective to take actual fish oil or actual algal-derived DHA, EPA, because there's no conversion to do. And I don't know that our body needs to convert all of our ALA into longer chain omega-3s, but there's something to be said for taking it in its most active form.